Hello, this is Angelia, and you are listening to or watching the podcast, Why You Do What You Do. The podcast that talks about human development and psychology to help you figure out maybe a little bit more why you do what you do. And last time we were talking about slow to warm up children. And these children were probably, not encouraged to explore at some point, and so they're a little hesitant to do that. And we're going to pick back up on goodness of fit, appropriateness of environmental demands and constraints to a child's temperament. Now, most of us as parents were willing to make things comfortable for the child, to make things how the child was comfortable with, to keep them happy and engaged in learning, whatever. There are parents who unfortunately are not willing to do this, and they feel like the child needs to fit what they want. And there are a lot of people, unfortunately, especially in more unenlightened society backgrounds, who think that child should fit what they want it to. And so they're going to try and put this child in the box they want it in. The problem with that is, one size does not fit all. And so then the child doesn't fit in their lifestyle. And that's a problem for some parents because they're rigid, they're unwilling to adapt to what's needed. We adapted to all the kids, like I said, all my kids were sleeping through the night by 3 months old. Some of them needed, a touch, a pacifier, diaper change in the night. Some of them, just wanted to know you were there, and then they would calm back down. If you patted them on the back, they would calm back down. They might have had a bad dream, We don't know if babies have bad dreams, but they might have. All my kids were sleeping through the night by the time they were 3 months old. I had friends whose kids were 18 months old and 2 years old, still not sleeping through the night because their children were insecure that their needs were going to get met. So, you got to fit yourself and the environment to the child. Because if you're not doing that, what you're doing is causing more problems for yourself. Yeah, that's a thing. Let's see. Where am I looking? Here it is. How stable is temperament? Temperament appears to be largely inborn, meaning you're born with it pretty much. Probably hereditary, which means, good old mom and pop gave that to you. And fairly stable, meaning how you start out is usually how you change unless there's interventions, like there's anger management for people who have that problem and things. Newborn babies show different patterns of sleeping, fussing, and activity, and these differences tend to persist to some degree throughout, their life, basically. And it's like I said, every kid was different, but if you meet their needs are met. They're secure, they trust, and their life is going to be 10,000 times better. Biological basis of temperament. Temperament, like emotions, seems to have a biological basis, which we just talked about. In longitudinal research with about 400 children, got a little itch here, sorry. Starting in infancy, Jerome Kagan and his colleagues have studied an aspect of temperament called inhibition to the unfamiliar, or shyness, which has to do with how sociable a child is with stranger children and how boldly or cautiously the child approaches unfamiliar objects and situations. This characteristic is associated with differences in physical features, such as eye color, and in brain functioning, as reflected in physiological signs such as heart rate, blood pressure, and pupil dilation. So if a child was to come across, if a blonde-haired, blue-eyed child is to come across black-haired, brown-eyed child, they might be more hesitant because this child looks very different from them. It's not what they're used to. When asked to solve problems or learn new information, the shyest child, which is only about 15%, showed higher and less variable heart rates than bolder children. So when the shyer child was asked to do these things, it sped their heart rate up, and that's a sign of stress. So this child was under stress, having to interact and do new things. And the pupils of their eyes dilated more. Another sign of, wariness. They're getting ready for that fight or flight. They're not quite sure. The boldest children, about 10%, tended to be energetic and spontaneous and to have very low heart rates because it didn't bother them. They were, more outgoing, and it wasn't a big deal for them to have to interact with people and do new things. So, like I said, everybody's different, and you don't need to be forcing a shyer child into things because, as you just heard, it raises the heart rate, pupils dilate, they're stressed. So, if you're trying to force a child, and they might have, a mental disability, they might be on the spectrum, you don't know that until later on. What you're doing is you're causing this child stress and making it less likely for them to engage in things later on. Whereas a bolder child, encourage them, let them go out and do, within reason. You got to kind of, like I said, little people's crazy. You got to keep your eyeballs on them and keep a rein on them, till they're old enough to be out and about. Cross-cultural differences. As Margaret Mead observed, temperament may be affected by culturally influenced child-raising practices. Infants in Malaysia, an island group in Southeastern Asia, tend to be less adaptable, more wary of new experiences, and more readily responsive to stimuli than U.S. babies. And that's probably because their environment is very predictable. They probably do the same thing every day. They're usually carried around with their mother or set somewhere every day to where same things always going on. This may be because Malay parents do not often expose young children to situations that require adaptability. And these slick pages. They encourage infants to be acutely aware of sensations, such as the need for a diaper change. And, that's not something we necessarily teach our children, So, again, everyone's different. Every culture's different. Things are happening different. A lot of people here in good old USA think our way's the best way and it's the only way and everything else is weird, and no. No. There's a whole other big world out there, folks. Earliest social experiences. The infant in the family. Infant care practices and pattern of interactions vary greatly around the world, depending on the culture's view of infants' nature and needs. In Bali, infants are believed to be ancestors or gods brought to life in human form, and thus must be treated with utmost dignity and respect. So, that's kind of a cool thing. It certainly doesn't happen here, in America, and some people actually look at their children with disrespect because they can't take care of themselves yet, and that's like, I forgot who I was talking to one day. I wouldn't mention their name anyway. I was talking about how the babies are gross, they're puking and crapping everywhere and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, yeah, of course they are. They're babies. The Bing of West Africa think that young babies can understand all languages, whereas people in the Micronesian atoll of Ifuluk believe that babies cannot understand language at all, and therefore adults do not speak to them. So, that's not good necessarily. They would have a slower language development because, babies love for you to speak to them because they want to learn to communicate. The mother's role. In a series of pioneering experiments by Harry Harlow and his colleagues, rhesus monkeys were separated from their mothers 6 to 12 hours after birth and raised in a laboratory. And that's a shame. You don't find out why, but that's a shame. The infant monkeys were put into cages with one of two kinds of surrogate mothers: a plain cylindrical wire mesh form or form covered with terry cloth. Some monkeys were fed from bottles connected to the wire mothers. Others were nursed by the warm, cuddly cloth ones. When the monkeys were allowed to spend time with either kind of mother, they all spent more time clinging to the cloth surrogates, even if they were being fed only by the wire ones. In an unfamiliar room, the babies raised by cloth surrogates showed more natural interest in exploring than those raised by wire surrogates, even when the appropriate mothers were there. So that shows you right there that warm mothering that you give the child, the holding and the warmth, that helps them to be more outgoing in the world. That helps them to be more curious and feel more secure. So, like I said, it was kind of cruel to do to the poor little monkeys. But science does a lot of things that we don't necessarily agree with, but they learn things from it. That's part of experimenting. But yeah, so just the fact that a little monkey preferred a terry cloth form to a wire one, just shows you that softness, that warmth means something to a baby. The father's role. In the past, research on infant psychosocial development focused almost exclusively on mothers and babies. But now researchers are studying relationships between infants and their fathers, as well as siblings and other caregivers. By looking at the family as a functioning unit, we get a fuller picture of the network of relationships among all its members. All cultures recognize the fathering role, but beyond the initial act of insemination, it may be seen as a social construction. The role may be taken on or shared by someone other than their biological father, the mother's brother, as in Botswana, where young mothers remain with their own childhood family until their partners are in their 40s, or a grandfather, as in Vietnam. The father's role, like the mother's, entails emotional commitments and often direct involvement in the care and upbringing of the children. While father's involvement varies greatly, women are children's primary caregivers in most cultures. In the United States, father's involvement in caregiving and play has greatly increased since 1970 as more mothers work outside the home and concepts of fathering change. A father's frequent and positive involvement with his child from infancy on is directly related to the child's well-being and cognitive and social development. So dads, you are important, and a lot of times you are the male role model for male children, and you are the role model for females in what a male is. So think about that. Children learn what they live. So your behavior dictates how your son is likely to behave, and it dictates what your daughter will tolerate from the men that she is with. So fathers, you are important. So be a good father. Window on the world, fatherhood in 3 cultures. Urbanization in West Africa and Inner Mongolia. In Cameroon and other rural areas of West Africa, men have more than one wife, and children grow up in large extended families linked to kinship-based clans. Although children guarantee the perpetuation of a man's family line, they belong to the kinship group, not just to the parents. After weaning, children may have multiple caregivers or may even be given to other members of the group to raise. And, here in our country, we would think that was just like this horrible, my gosh, how could you do that and just give your kid away, but that's their culture's setup. They have this group, and if the man has, more than one wife, and this wife couldn't have children, or maybe this wife only has one and this wife has 5, she might hand it over to the one, that has less, and they're all raised together as a group, so it's not strange to them. It's a normal way for them. Aka pygmies. The Aka are hunter-gatherers in the tropical forests of Central Africa who move frequently from camp to camp in small, tightly knit groups. Oh, my goodness. And are highly protective of young children. In contrast with fathers in the protective of young children, the other two cultures just described, Aka fathers are as nurturing and emotionally supportive as Aka mothers. In fact, Aka fathers provide more direct infant care than fathers in any other known society. They hold their babies frequently and hug, kiss, clean, and play gently with them. So, they're involved more than any other fathers in the world, according to this study. So, dads, be a part of your child's life. Be a good example for your children. Don't just feel like you're the check or the breadwinner. Whenever I hear some of these men, we don't even want to get into that, what things I've heard in counseling. But, you are an important part of the family. And when your wife has children, then you become parents. And it's your job to raise these children. And if you're being kind of a baby man narcissist and feel like, oh, well, when my wife had the kids, she didn't have no use for me anymore. She didn't pay me any attention. Well, she probably paid you less attention because she had a kid to raise, right? And you were supposed to be helping in this, participating in this. You're the one who basically shut yourself out, and that's a common thing with men. The wife might give him a lot of attention, baby him a little bit, and my grandma said to me that men never grow up. They just become big boys, and there's a lot of men that do that. I'm not saying all men do that. There's a lot of men, once the children come in, they're jealous of their own children because the children get more attention from their wife than they are now, which, of course, hello, your wife shouldn't have to feed you and diaper you and, entertain you if you're, cranky and not going to sleep. And if your wife does have to do that for you, you have a problem and you need to go to therapy. Just putting that out there. How parents shape gender differences. Being male or female affects how people look, how they move their bodies, and how they work, play, and dress. It influences what they think about themselves and what others think of them. So there are gender differences between men and women, especially, heterosexual men and women. There's a big gender difference. So, like I said about how the fathers are a model for the boys and a model for what the girls will tolerate in another man, the mothers, same thing. You're a model for those girls in how to be a woman, and a model for your sons on what they can expect from women. So, like I said, children learn where they live, so be good. Be a decent person. If you want your kids to grow up and be a decent person, that's just the facts right there. Parental shaping of boys' and girls' personalities appears to begin very early. Fathers, especially, promote gender typing, the process by which children learn behavior that their culture considers appropriate for each sex. Fathers treat boys and girls more differently than mothers do, even during the first year. So there's a little bit of a gender bias there with dads. They like the boys better. They want the boys to be, like good old dad. And the girls are, they're a little less important because they're girls. So there's still some sexism in child rearing. Guys. During the second year, fathers talk more and spend more time with sons than with daughters. Mothers talk more and more supportively to daughters than to sons. Overall, fathers are less talkative and supportive, but also less negative in their speech than mothers are. These differences are especially pronounced with toddlers, whose mothers typically spend much more time with them than fathers do. Fathers of toddlers play more roughly with sons and show more sensitivity to daughters. Okay, so moms are with the kids more, so mom's fuse gets to be shorter. So a lot of times kids know that, and so they'll go to dad and ask dad things, well, what did your mother say? I don't, yeah, because your mom probably said no. But, dads, stop being sexist in your child rearing. Anything you can do with the boy, you can do with the girl. And we were kids. My parents kind of saw that was a thing. And like 1 year, me and my brother both got a dump truck full of little plastic animals who could drive our little dump trucks around, because I got jealous of a stuffed animal that he had, and I got this doll that I didn't really care for. So they figured out, well, we'll just get them the same thing, and then there can't be any hard feelings. Developmental issues in infancy. How does a dependent newborn with a limited emotional repertoire and pressing physical needs become a child with complex feelings and the abilities to understand and control them? Much of this development revolves around issues regarding relationships with caregivers. Like I said, everything you do is teaching this child. Every behavior is showing this child something. Everything you do is teaching this child about the world. So, it's worth the time and effort, to make their experience a good one. Developing trust. For a far longer period than the young of other mammals, human babies are dependent on other people for food, for protection, and for their very lives. How do they come to trust that their needs will be met? According to Erikson, early experiences are the key. And I think they're probably going to go into the crying it out thing probably here. The first stage in psychosocial development that Erikson identified is basic trust versus basic mistrust. The stage begins at birth and continues until about 12 to 18 months. In these early months, babies develop a sense of the reliability of the people and objects in their world. They need to develop a balance between trust, which lets them form intimate relationships, and mistrust, which enables them to protect themselves. If trust predominates, as it should, children develop the virtue of hope, the belief that they can fulfill their needs and obtain their desires. If mistrust predominates, children will view the world as unfriendly and unpredictable and will have trouble forming relationships. And they didn't go into it, so I'll go into it. That's, where these people believe that if the child is crying, put them in their own room, close the door, let them cry it out. Hell no. That is exact 100% wrong thing to do. You need to show that child that it can trust you to help meet its needs. That is how a child builds trust, and trusts that the world is an okay place, and trusts that someday they can meet their needs for themselves, I can't stand it. I cannot stand it. You need to be there for that child. You had that child. You need to be there for that child. And that's a fact of life. Developing attachments. Attachment is a reciprocal, enduring emotional tie between an infant and a caregiver, each of whom contribute to the quality of the relationship. Attachments have adaptive value for babies, ensuring that their psychosocial as well as physical needs will be met. According to ethological theory, infants and parents are biologically predisposed to become attached to each other, and attachment promotes a baby's survival. Because if the mother loves the child, she's going to do what it takes to protect that child, and it will survive. So it's in both interests for the attachment to happen. Now, there are situations like postnatal depression and things like that, where it becomes a problem, and then you should seek help if that becomes a problem. Because you should love that baby should love you, and that's how it should be. And if anything different is going on, like I said, you need to contact a professional and see what exactly is going on. Studying patterns of attachment. Mary Ainsworth first studied attachment in the early 1950s with John Bowlby. On the basis of ethological studies of bonding in animals and observation of disturbed children in a London psychoanalytic clinic, buzz off, bug, name Jesus, Bowlby was convinced of the importance of the mother-baby bond. He warned against separating mother and baby without providing good substitute caregiving. Ainsworth, after studying attachment in African babies in Uganda through naturalistic observations in their homes, devised the strange situation, a now standard laboratory-based technique designed to assess attachment patterns between an infant and an adult. Typically, the adult is the mother, though other adults have taken part as well, and the infant is 10 to 24 months old. The strange situation consists of a sequence of 8 episodes, which takes less than half an hour. During the time, the mother twice leaves the baby in an unfamiliar room. The first time with a stranger. The second time, she leaves the baby alone, and the stranger comes back before the mother does. The mother then encourages the baby to explore and play again, and gives comfort if the baby seems to need it. Of particular concern is the baby's response each time the mother returns. When Ainsworth and her colleagues observed 1-year-olds in the strange situation and at home, they found these main patterns of attachment. Secure, the most common category, into which the percent of U.S. babies fell, and 2 forms of anxious or insecure attachment. Avoidant and ambivalent or resistant. Babies with secure attachment cry or protest when the mother leaves and greet her happily when she returns. They use her as a secure base, leaving her to go off and explore, but returning occasionally for reassurance. And that's what you should be for your child, is a secure base, your home base. They need to go out into the world and explore and do everything, but you need to always be there for them as home base, because they need that foundation, because you can only build on a firm foundation. If you are religious and talk about, Jesus is your cornerstone, your firm foundation. I'm sure you might have heard that song in church somewhere. But you are to be that child's foundation. Your home base. They can go out into the world and explore and know they can always come back to you and your home base. And that's how it should be. Secure attachment. Pattern in which an infant cries or, good gosh, this is wrinkly, protests when the primary caregiver leaves and actively seeks out the caregiver upon his or her return. And that's how it should be. If you're the person to take care of the child, of course, you're the one they're going to want. They're not going to want some stranger. They want you. Secure base. Infants' use of a parent or other familiar caregiver as a departure point for exploration and a safe place to return periodically for emotional support. And that's why, you see little kids, if you say hi to a little kid that don't know you, they might go to their parent's leg and hug the leg. That's the secure base there. They don't know you, not sure about you, but they're going to go to mom and, see how mom feels about that. Avoidant attachment, a pattern in which an infant rarely cries when separated from the primary caregiver and avoids contact upon his or her return. Now, I have seen that, and usually that is due to bad parenting. The child has no reason to want to cling to that parent because that parent is not a safe base. They're not nurturing, they're not a safe place for the child to be. So that's something that they're looking at when they do this is, if the child is avoiding even looking at that parent. If the child doesn't go to that parent for comfort, that means the child has learned they cannot trust that parent to be there for them. So who cares about them? I can't rely on, that parent to take care of me. So who cares about them? And that's a shame. But sometimes that is what happens in life, and that children learn to just be, avoiding attachment because they know that parent is not going to meet their needs. And that's where I'm going to leave you today. And I hope this has helped you learn a little bit more about why you do what you do. Until next time.